Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 1 discussion. Welcome to day 18 of Teaser season for patch 3.29 and the upcoming Curse of the Allflame expansion. Today, we're going to be talking about patch note changes, but we don't have very many of those after we had a massive overdose on them yesterday that got both a live stream and then a summary video from me. On top of that, we also have Grinding Gear Games deciding to put out some data on some of the new gems, and they gave us a little bit of a heads up on what the new league mechanic is going to look like in practice. So we're going to take a look at all three of these, starting with the patch notes. This is the least consequential set of patch notes that we've looked at in the entire expansion. So let's get through it quickly. There are some skills that are excellent for dealing damage. There are some skills that are all about utility. Imagine a patch note that read your Flame Dash or your Frost Blink deals 17% more damage. Would you be excited about this? No, you probably use the skill anyway, but most of the time, it's not going to be something that actually enhances your gameplay in any noticeable way. It's just something where a utility skill starts doing a smidgen more damage, but it still only really tickles enemies most of the time. Well, that's what this patch note's all about. Bladeful of Trathus. This is a utility skill that is used when players want to project small hits to every enemy around them on a frequent basis. There's a number of ways you can do this in conjunction with Hextouch support, in conjunction with all sorts of other fun and games, but it is now going to do 16% more damage than it used to do, which is going from basically nothing to basically nothing plus 16%. Most of the time, this is a complete and utter nothing burger, but I'm sure someone will put together some meme build that uses Bladeful of Trathus in a different way as a way to deal damage with it rather than as a way to get utility out of it. And if you are that person, then this might just be the most important note in the patch notes for you. However, it will be you being that person, not one of those people, because I don't think that this is likely to be something that sets the game on fire this league. After that, there's a number of changes that have come up to gems and also some more information on gems in general. Grinding Gear Games put out a major post on new and changed gems in Curse of the Allflame. Some of these are things we already knew about. In fact, the vast majority of this post is just things from the patch notes put into a nice, easier to digest form for many people. So definitely have a flick through here if there's any skills that you want to just check exactly what their current status is. However, most of the changes that you see here were things that we discussed either yesterday or on day 12 when we went through the massive live streams discussing all the fun and games that was going on in the patch notes. However, there is some new information here, and that is what I want to call to your attention. We have 9 new gems and 3 new exceptional supports to go through. Interestingly, 4 of those 9 gems are actually exceptional gems, which is something that's a little bit new, and they play by quite different rules to everything else in the game. Now, we have heard about them already, so Pact of Lycia, Pact of K'Tash, Pact of Ghorr, and Pact of Beidat, but we have a little bit more information about them now. Another thing that's really interesting is that these are gem level 20, whereas instead I was expecting that these would have a gem level of 3 or something along those lines. So we still don't know exactly where these are going to come from. I was expecting, based on the names, that Pact of Lycia maybe comes from Lycia, either the Nightmare Map boss or the Sanctum, and that Pact of Beidat, Pact of Ghorr, and Pact of K'Tash might come from Beyond bosses with the same name, but even that is not completely confirmed yet. Let's go through all of the new gems, and just to mix things up, let's go from the bottom up. Causing current support. Sometimes you're really good at shocking things, but you wish that those enemies would just chill out a little. And yeah, it's editing GOG here. I thought I would just show Lightning Conduit of the Heavens for a completely unrelated reason on the screen. Nothing to do with skills that inflict really severe shocks that are really quite good now and that also have no capacity to chill normally. No, just forget about that. I just thought I'd show Lightning Conduit of the Heavens here because it's decorative. Sometimes you're bitterly freezing enemies and chilling them to the bone, but you wish that they would be a bit more shocked at your presence. Causing current support is all about this. Causing current support probably does not belong on your main skill most of the time. There will be exceptions, but most of the time I would use this on a secondary skill, and I would particularly use this if you're playing a build that does something like Orb of Storms in order to inflict shock, and then uses Lightning Conduit to eat that shock to do tremendous amounts of damage. If you're doing something like that, then Causing Current is going to provide you a lot of benefit. So firstly, 28% increased effect of chill and shock inflicted with supported skills. Chances are you're only doing one of these, but that's really nice to have. Next, 10% increased duration of ailments inflicted with supported skills. kind of neither here nor there, but I think that's the quality bonus. But after that, we have the thing that is the reason you're going to use this. This inflicts chill on enemies when they are shocked by your hits, reducing their action speed by your shock effect. And it does the same in reverse. Shock enemies when they're chilled by your hits, increasing damage taken by chill effect. It is a very important to notice that this is only when things are chilled by your hits. This does not include if you happen to chill something through the use of bad ground effects, because there are a number of skills that leave chilling ground areas, and chilling ground is not going to end up being chilling and shocking ground through the use of coursing current support. This is something that definitely will have a niche. The other thing that's interesting here is that there is a bit of a spoiler as to the League Mechanics boss, and that is found inside the flavor text of this. Velka reached out her hand. Now this backs up the fact that we've got from yesterday when Grinding Gear Games dropped the character power passive tree, that there is a new Velka-themed Bloodline Ascendancy as well. So a little bit of information there as to what we can expect at the bottom of the sea, but we still got to figure out exactly how we get to Velka, and of course, how to defeat her. After that, we have Communion support. So Minion Pact. Minion Pact ended up getting completely and utterly deleted and completely and utterly changed into Communion support, which serves a different role. Instead of eating your strongest minion in order to empower spells, which was then something that was completely and utterly busted for Blade Vortex and just kind of mediocre with everything else, Communion support is going to feed off all of the permanent minions that you've got, but it doesn't actually harm them in doing so. Instead, those minions just simply provide a buff to the spell. 20 to 30 added physical damage for each permanent minion. This is something that if you can get 20 permanent minions, it's a reasonable support. You're adding 500 flat physical, that's quite a chunk. And you'll definitely have to mess around a lot with zombies and specters and all that sort of fun stuff, but you'll be able to find ways to get quite a large number of them. One thing to note is that this does compete with some of the investment you can make into Phantasms. Phantasms, that's kind of hard to do, but there are ways to get Phantasmal Might, which then gives you a similar effect, but it's based on your Phantasms. Unfortunately, Phantasms are not permanent minions, so this isn't going to help with them. After this, we have Crystalfall. I really, really like this one. I think the numbers on this are quite good based on a first glance, and it's something that is going to change the way slam builds play a little bit. This probably comes from the Abyss Pinnacle boss, and it is a typical exceptional support gem, so it goes to level 3. 20 quality is what we've got here, but your supported skills will trigger Falling Crystal on hit. The key details of this are found in the Falling Crystal mechanics. So this has a cooldown time of 1 second, but it also can store 3 uses. What this means is essentially at the start of a combat, or anytime there's a pause in the combat, you get 2 additional uses banked up. Otherwise, it's on a 1 second cooldown, but you will be able to deploy a lot of them at the start of a fight. The attack damage at gem level 20 is a solid 637% of base, and this hits a 2.5 meter radius. I don't mind 2.5 meters as a radius for something that comes down as just an additional proc when you slam an enemy. Now, the big test on this though is going to be if there is delay. If it ends up landing and hitting the enemies almost all the time, or if there's enough of a delay that monsters are sometimes just no longer in the place where the crystal lands, that's going to be the thing that this will live or die based on. Based on the numbers though, it is looking promising, so I think this is looking like one of the better things that's coming out in the way of new gems. After this, we have the packs. So let's start with Lycia. All of these packs, even though we have their level 20 quality stats, we don't know enough to really judge them. And the reason for this is that they all burden you with an affliction, but we don't know how bad these afflictions are. So if these afflictions are something like 95% less maximum life, or you take 750% more damage, then suddenly these are just crushed. These are just almost useless, except in very specific glass cannon situations. Or if it was something like you cannot move. So there could be a very, very severe effect. It's probably not that bad. It's probably something that you feel, but that isn't completely terrible. But we just can't even rule that out. However, the payoff for them is pretty high. Pact of Lycia. This is going to empower the next 3 channeling spells that you cast, and it's only on a 4-second cooldown, and whilst it has a mana cost, it's not an egregiously high one. The most difficult thing here is the cast time. The cast time is 800 milliseconds, which is not trivial. However, the next 3 channeling spells you cast deal 40% more damage. That's just the first part of this. Then we have the triggers from it. Heaven's Scourge. This causes a bolt of Beidat's lightning to strike an area, dealing lightning damage. Now you're going to look at this and you're going to say 130 to 2467 damage at 230% effectiveness of added damage. That is not a very high number, and you'd be right. However, this skill triggers every 0.3 seconds while channeling empowered spells, up to a maximum of 10 times. And when channeling empowered spells end, this skill triggers again for every time it was triggered while channeling. Let's imagine that you get the perfect situation with this. Let's say that you've got no cooldown mitigation on this, so it is the full 0.3 seconds. Then you're going to stand in place and you're going to channel this, and it's going to take a full 3 seconds to get all 10 of these bolts. Then you're going to stop channeling your spell, and suddenly all 10 extra bolts are going to come down from the heavens. You're going to get 20 hits. That's like a 4,600% effectiveness of added damage. Now, it's important to note that that's going to be based upon the support gems that are affecting Heaven's Scourge, which are not the support gems that are affecting your channeling skill. So you could potentially use this as a dual 6-link setup. You could potentially use this as a 6-link in the chest for your main skill, your channeling skill, and then your Pact of Lycia is in a 4-link. Both of these feel like reasonable options. You might decide, you know what, Heaven's Scourge, let's just forget about that. All I care about is Pact of Lycia's primary effect. Empowered skills deal 40% more damage. So, the upside here is huge. The downside is unknown. This could be anywhere from S tier to dead on arrival, and we don't know yet. And it's all because we don't know how severe those afflictions are. After this, we have Pact of K'Tash. Pact of K'Tash is tremendous. Again, though, it has the same drawback. It is going to burden you with an affliction. We don't know what these afflictions are. This could be crushing. This is something that empowers your Vaal spell skills, and some of these are already pretty good. So there's been a couple of times throughout Path of Exile's history where Vaal Fireball and Vaal Spark have been excellent. They're basically clear skills. They don't do very much single target damage. Then there's ones that are very good for single target on builds that might otherwise struggle there, such as Vaal Flame Blast. Now, Pact of K'Tash is going to empower the next Vaal spell that you cast that is damaging. So you can't use this in conjunction with Vaal auras. That's important to note. The empowered skill deals 29% more damage, which is great. The empowered skill has 50% less soul gain prevention duration, and empowered skills regain their consumed souls when they are used. It's this last thing that I think is the real winner on this. This is going to allow you, once per 6 seconds, to just drop a Vaal spell skill without having to use any souls at all. You do need to have the souls to use them, but you don't need to actually expend them. That is really strong, especially against certain bosses. And you want to keep that in mind. This allows you to, for instance, make a build that focuses on using Vaal Flame Blast to kill bosses, something that previously would not really have been possible. You still do need to do enough damage with regular Flame Blast or your other skills in order to build up the souls to use Vaal Flame Blast for the first time. But once you get there, Pact of K'Tash will do that for you. However, again, you're dealing with this Pact mechanic and these afflictions. We don't know how bad they are, so roll a dice on that if you want. After this, Pact of Ghorr. Pact of Ghorr is something that empowers your non-affliction damage over time spells. So non-affliction damage over time spells are the ones that inflict direct damage to monsters and do not do so through the use of poison or through the use of ignite or bleed for that matter. Don't think there's any spells that bleed, but that would be something that would be an affliction if it was. For example, Reap. Reap deals physical damage over time, but it is not a bleed. That is the sort of thing that's going to be impacted by Pact of Ghorr. Pact of Ghorr is going to cause your empowered spells, which is going to be the next 3 non-ailment damage over time spells you cast. It's going to cause them to deal 40% more damage over time, which is a lot. It also has a secondary effect. It has a base duration of 6 seconds, and during this period, you're going to trigger Fleshrend every 2 seconds, potentially faster if you can increase the stage of your affliction. Now, Fleshrend, to me, appears to be a physical version of Soulrend. Got to actually look at this in practice and make sure that's correct, but fires projectiles in a circle, and it fires 3 of them. Projectiles will pierce all targets. They deal 1521.1 base physical damage per second. The base duration of the debuff is only 400 milliseconds, so not particularly long. And there is a skill effect duration boost there, which is probably the quality bonus on this. But modifiers of spell damage apply to this skill's damage over time effect, and while they are affected by this debuff, so while enemies are taking damage from Fleshrend, they are also suffering increased damage over time, which is a really strong thing as well. So Pact of Ghorr is providing a lot of power there, but again, you got to deal with these afflictions, and we don't know how bad they are. Finally, we have one more thing, Pact of Beidat, that is exactly in this same design space. We don't know how bad these afflictions are going to be, but this is something that empowers non-channeling spells that either fire projectiles, apply an effect to an area around a target location, or fire chaining beams. So, something that is fundamentally a fireball, something that is fundamentally a Stormcall effect, or something that is fundamentally an arc effect. Any of these things can be empowered, but things that don't quite fit any of those situations don't work. Empowers the next 8 spells you cast. Empowered skills deal 35% more damage, both with their hits and their ailments. Empowered skills also affect 8 additional areas in a spiral around the targeted area. So this one only applies if you are firing off something that is fundamentally a Stormcall, and therefore is applying damage in an area. It is also going to hit areas in a spiral around it. Beams from empowered skills, i.e. your arc effects, they're going to chain an additional 6 times. And empowered skills fire 6 additional projectiles, all of which are in a circle. So if you're firing off fireballs, you're going to get 7 fireballs for the price of 1. All this is really cool, but again, it lives or dies based upon what those afflictions are. And also, we've got to figure out how, in fact, you get these things. They are listed as exceptional, but they also have 20 levels, which is not the same as any other exceptional gem in the game, and they only require level 70. So who knows whether they're going to be available to have it 2020 by level 70 or not. I'm assuming they're not. I'm assuming that they come from the bosses with the same name, Lycia and the Sanctum, or potentially Lycia the Nightmare from the Nightmare map, and Pact of K'Tash, Pact of Ghorr, and Pact of Beidat would then come from beyond bosses with the same name. But that is speculation. We're going to find that out once the game goes live. After this, we have Mana-Infused Staff. Now, we already saw this one in action, but there's a couple of things that are different here. Firstly, we now have a sense as to how it scales as it levels up. The buff grants 24% more chance to block attack and spell damage. So this is not a tremendously strong defensive effect at endgame. It is a solid defensive effect, and it's certainly something that staff builds will appreciate, but this is primarily something you're using because what really scales on it is that retributive lightning damage. That thing goes up to 73% of your maximum mana. So, can you use this effectively? I think this has legs, especially given that they have gone out of their way to really buff caster staves. However, you will need to invest in quite a few things for this to be good. You will need to be investing in your mana, you will need to be investing in lightning skill gems, and you'll also need to be investing in block. If you can make all of this investment work, then by all means run Mana-Infused Staff. I think it could be quite good for you. But if you can't make all of that work, then, well, it's not for you. That said, 73% of maximum mana can be quite chunky, and I think that's definitely worth keeping in mind. Next up, we have Reap of Butchery. So, this thing requires a substantially higher physical damage over time component than baseline Reap. It has a moderately higher physical damage over time component than baseline Reap. It's actually higher by less than I was wanting it to be. It's only higher by about 1/6. So it's something that definitely has a number of things going for it. It gets more damage scaling with blood charges. It definitely does less initial instant application damage, and it requires you to be in close proximity to enemies, so it has real drawbacks. But if you're playing something really tanky, you might be able to make this work. I would say that this is going to be one of the hardest skills to make work. Not saying that it's bad, just saying that you will need to get a number of defensive benefits set up on your character in order to use this thing effectively. Holy Sweep of Hammerfalls. This has a 5-second cooldown on it. I was not expecting a 5-second cooldown on it, and I'm kind of just not sold on it. I don't think there's people crying out for additional big cooldowns on their AoE attack, non-slam, non-strike melee builds. And on top of that, you also have to be converting into lightning for this to work, or you need to at least be okay with converting into lightning. So yeah, I'm going to call Holy Sweep of Hammerfalls a real disappointment. 5 seconds cooldown just for 281% of base damage. I mean, sure, it's got its benefits. It's going to hit multiple times, but I'm still very, very, very not sold on this. I feel like this, if the cooldown was not there at all, maybe you'd mess around with it, but 5 seconds it's an eternity in Path of Exile. Holy Hammer of Spirals. Every gem is somewhat of a puzzle in optimization, but this is a puzzle that might be very difficult to solve. Here, the question is, how can I generate so many power charges that I can afford to set off really big Holy Hammers of Spirals all the time? Now, you might be thinking, oh yeah, power charges are the easiest thing to generate in the game, and you'd be right, they are the easiest type of charge to generate. The thing is that Holy Hammer of Spirals does not want you to generate 1 or 2 charges per time that you use it. This is not an easy puzzle like solving Flicker Strike. This requires intense, explosive generation of power charges. Now, the most explosive way of generating power charges realistically is going to be Farrell's Fur. Farrell's Fur allows you to, especially with the aspect of the cat, allows you to generate a lot of power charges once every, I think it's 12 seconds by default, but with investment into decreasing the duration of that, you can get it to be a much more reasonable amount. So you could dedicate your chest to wearing a skin cat, and you could then feed all of those power charges into Holy Hammer of Spirals. You could invest in power charges on your build, and you might have something that's functional. But at that point, do you really want to do that over using a different slam skill instead? The answer is I don't think so, but by all means, feel free to play around with this. There might be other ways that you can generate that sort of number of power charges as well. There is a mod that exists on Precursor Emblem Rings that causes you to have a percentage chance and quite a large proc for any power charge gain that you get to be up to your maximum instead. So you could potentially have 1 or even 2 of that mod. That might be able to help you with it. And then something that's a more traditional source of power charge generation might be enough that every second time you fire it off, maybe you've got your full 10, 11, or 12, or whatever number of power charges you've got. One other thing I want to throw in here, because I know someone's going to think of this, Ralakesh boots. Ralakesh boots, unfortunately, do not work. And the reason for that is that if you're wearing the Ralakesh boots and they take you up to 10 power charges, then you are unable to spend power charges to go below 10. So you are counted as having 10 power charges, but you're unable to spend those 10 in order to go down to 0 and then use your Holy Hammer of Spirals to maximum effect. So yeah, this is just simply asking too much of you. It does do quite a bit. The payoff is really real there, but at the same time, it's really hard to pull off, and I don't see a way to do it. And finally, we have Divine Blast of Radiance. This is a very complex gem. So this has the orb tag, but a maximum of 3 orbs. And what it does, it projects a beam of holy light from your shield to a targeted location, causing an implosion of holy energy. So this deals damage. The energy then lingers for a short duration as an orb, periodically releasing larger explosions. Increases and reductions to attack speed, they affect the rate at which explosions occur. So the key thing here is that you're going to be firing out a beam from your shield that's then going to leave an area of bad stuff on the ground. And this is going to stay there for 5 seconds, and then it's going to fire off a baseline 1 explosion per second. But if you can scale your attack damage quite a bit, you can make it quite a bit better than once per second. Those are then going to deal damage equal to baseline Divine Blast, which is not terrible, but also not great. You're almost certainly going to want to use this in conjunction with the unique shield Emperor's Vigilance, because it has just more armor and more energy shield than you're going to get on any other shield. So that's Divine Blast of Radiance. I think it's kind of interesting, but the gems that I think will be the most exciting out of this, I think Crystalfall Support is definitely going to be cool, and the Pacts have the potential to be cool, depending upon how serious their drawback is. Reaper Butchery, hard to use, but definitely solid. And Communion and Coursing Current both have their niche applications. Finally, GGG Games also put out a video today. This is about deep diving into Voyages. Now, this is a video that showcases some gameplay from the equivalent mechanic to Grand Heist in this league. What I want you to do is pay attention to one thing in particular, and that is the number of sockets on items that drop colored. The reason I say this is that we know chromatic orbs are getting rarer. A lot of people have been asking me, hey, do you think they'll remove the chromatic orb recipe? I think the answer is no. And I think you will understand why when you look through this video. I think there are 0 or 1 chromatic items that are shown, and this is all going to be level 83 content. Without further ado, let's jump in and watch Octavian play.
Hi, I'm Octavian, game designer on Path of Exile. In Path of Exile, Curse of the Allflame, we will be introducing the new Voyage mechanic, in which players will be able to meticulously plan and then execute on sea-floor excursions, reclaiming lost treasures and sending piles of loot
So I'm not sure if you noticed this one, but you'll see that almost nothing here, almost nothing at all on this entire voyage loot here is colored sockets. Almost everything here is actually white sockets. However, we have one red socket on this Abyssal Scepter, and we have a green and a white socket on this Wraith Axe. And that is it. This one, however, is lower tier. Later on, we will see some higher tier content being run.
To the surface. In this video, we wanted to give you a closer look at Voyages, and some of what you might expect to find at the bottom of Rayclast's oceans. First, in order to embark, you'll need to scout at least 9 different charts. Once that's done, speak to Val aboard the Sovereign to begin planning your voyage. You'll find at least 1 chart, and sometimes 2, in every area, so you'll have plenty to plan your voyages with, even as early as Act 1. Now, each of the charts that will compose your voyage will have an implicit that is revealed once it's charted. These can offer powerful modifiers, which apply either to the charts adjacent to them, or to the voyage as a whole. We'll start by placing this chart in the center, where its modifier that spawns 3 Diviner Strongboxes in each adjacent area can have the most effect.
So one thing you're going to want to pay attention to here is which of your individual charts have very, very good implicits. I think the Diviner Strongbox one is an example of a reasonably good one. And here, that is one that's going to make sense to have in the center. But if you had something that was a little bit weaker, you might put it on an edge piece. And if you had something that's among the weakest, you'd put it in the corner. I think the best way to min-max this is actually going to be to just put aside the best 5% and ensure that they go in the center. Those ones you're likely going to put in the bottom right of the charts collection here and just leave them aside, and they'll be the centerpiece of a future voyage. And then I think the rest you'll just throw in any old way. However, there is another thing that's going to complicate matters, and that is when we start getting to these edge pieces and some of the things that they can benefit from.
This modifier will apply to these 4 other squares, meaning that this has already granted us 12 total Diviner Strongboxes to go and uncover. Next, before placing any further charts, we'll take a look at our border modifiers. These are similar to chart implicits, in that they affect the charts adjacent to them, but are a property of the edges of the voyage board itself, and are randomized each time you run a voyage. These can be quite powerful, and often can influence what charts you might want to place where. Take this one, for example, which will cause all rare monsters in the adjacent area to drop an additional Exalted Orb. This is powerful enough in its own right, but surely we can leverage this further. Charts such as this one, which increases the number of rare monsters in adjacent areas, and this one, which spawns powerful rare starfish monsters in adjacent areas. These can both be placed strategically to make maximum use of the border modifier.
Now, I think the thing that's going to happen here, there's going to be a number of these that are pretty bad. There's going to be a number of them that are mediocre, like this Exalted Orb one, and then there's going to be a tiny number of them that are extremely good. The early pain point for this mechanic is going to be that the ones that are extremely good are just not going to be very visible. I think one thing that would really, really improve this mechanic, and I strongly urge grinding games to do this, is to have some sort of visual indicator as to the rarity of these. Now, rarity and desirability don't necessarily correlate. It is the case in Path of Exile's current endgame. The most desirable scarabs are not the same as the most rare ones. For example, Breach Scarab of Resonant Cascade, that was the most valuable scarab throughout much of patch 3.28. However, Horn Scarab of Tradition is something like 10 times as rare, and it was generally a chaos or so. So rarity doesn't perfectly correlate with desirability, but if there was some sort of indication where cooler colors indicate, oh yeah, this is really common, and warmer colors indicate, hey, pay attention to me, I'm something unique and rare, even if I'm something you don't actually care about, that would be something that I think would be much appreciated, certainly by myself, but probably also by a number of other players.
Rest of this voyage. We'll place further charts in the remaining board squares, then descend to the sea floor to seek out our treasures. Once it's all sent back up, reclaim your sunken treasures, and do it all again. There are many such combinations, where weaving the correct border modifiers, adjacency effects, and even chart types together can make for some quite rewarding trips under the sea.
And this is basically the end of this one, but can I just point out like how difficult it is to look at this without a loot filter set up? So when you know the divination cards in question, you can quickly work out chaotic disposition ×2, prejudice ×1. These are both medium tier divination cards. Everything else there is stuff that you would probably hide on most filters, maybe with the exception of the Dreamland if it's day 1 or 2 of a league. But that's something that you can work out very quickly with a loot filter without having to know all of that information. And it's really hard to imagine that we used to play exactly like this. Loot filters were not in the game until, if I remember correctly, it might have been 2.0. I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlorbs have interesting results, and I will see you around.